Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we will continue our discussion of Chapter 4 of Freemasons for Dummies, Politics, Religion, and Freemasons. They don't mix.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, we have three-quarters of our usual group. We have Craig Graham, who's a Master Mason of Kalmaka Lodge number 160 in Vernon, British Columbia. David Colbeth is a member of King Solomon Lodge number 60 in Auburn, Washington. And I'm Matt Appel. I'm a member of Mill Creek Lodge in Montlake Terrace, Washington. I almost forgot my own lodge. So we've been discussing this book for a while and been interviewing various people sort of interspersed with it, but we're back on track. We're back in chapter 4, and we think we left off about the protocols of the elders of Zion sidebar there. And I guess I've sort of seen it crop up a little bit in various places as a I don't know, a bit of anti-masonry evidence. But I sort of lump it in my head rather, with the Taxel hoax of things that are just so ridiculous and yet keep coming up somehow. They have a life beyond any logic. Have you guys seen any of these things in your Masonic career? Have they cropped up?
Well, it's something you discuss. What's the old saying that goes, the bigger the lie, the more people that will believe it, right? And I mean, this document here, the protocols, has been around since the mid to late 1800s. It's mostly, historical evidence has it placed at the hands of the Tsarist secret police as a way of fomenting dissent and hatred against the Jewish population and the Russian Empire at that time. And then it shows up again and again throughout history, even after the collapse of the Tsars and the Russian Empire. Henry Ford drew upon it heavily and sold anti-Semitic newspapers through his car dealerships. And another radio personality in the United States in the 1930s, Father Coughlin, who was a virulent anti-Semite, drew upon it. And then, of course, it showed up in National Socialist ideology in Germany starting in the 1920s and into the 30s. So, like you say about the Taxil host, something that was started for as a fabrication to serve one purpose just ends up being this thing that throughout history just keeps showing up over and over and over again. I've never actually read the document. I don't know what the content of the protocols is. My understanding is it's a something that gives an explanation of the deep root of anti-Semitism, about the conspiracy of a cabal of a certain group of people in control of everything. But I'm not certain if either of you guys ever read it or parts of it or seen it.
I've not. I now that you've said that, I realize I should have read it by now. I may have to find a copy online somewhere.
Yeah.
Ford was a Mason, as I recall.
I believe he was, but that's not, unfortunately, it's not unheard of for Masons to hold rather extreme views about things from time to time. So he was really, Ford had some interesting opinions on things. And like we've discussed, this is a document that just sort of, every time we think it's disappeared, it just seems to come back again with a new life. And I've heard in conversations I've had with people, you reference the Taxil host, Leo Taxil. He was just a huckster and somebody that should have been running a sideshow at a carnival, basically, but he managed to create a small body of literature and go on the lecture circuit and did very well for himself. And he's even on the record as having admitted that everything he said was garbage.
Mm-hmm.
And
I find it interesting since we're in the politics chapter, there seem to be, well, masonry in Russia, from what I understand. I'm not a scholar, but from what I've read, there were times when masonry was almost embraced in Russia by the powers that be, and then other times when it was totally shunned, even by the same head person at various times. And then there are other places I want to say Sweden. I'm totally talking out my hat now. I should probably just shut up. But and then where the the aristocracy are involved in masonry, and it's very supportive of the government and that sort of stuff. And it's interesting how sometimes, like, we in the US, I'm assuming it's the same in Canada, we'd like to say, whatever, we're politically neutral and we don't care and that sort of stuff. But there are places where it's knee deep or ankle deep or shoulder deep in politics and in the local power structure, which is interesting.
Italy, I know is one where they've made the Grand Orient of Italy has made political statements over the years. There's a jurisdiction in Mexico that's rather controversial called the Val de Mexico. I'm butchering the Spanish because I took none of it in high school in Canada here. Is also an organization that's proscribed, I think, to most North American Freemasons, and even in Mexico, it's controversial. But again, it's an organization that's made a lot of political commentary. You talk about Sweden. I think the king of Sweden is considered to be the patron of Masonry over there. So just shows you how different the fraternity is treated from country to country.
And I think Mason's one of those places that is an exception, or Sweden is one of those places that's an exception to a whole lot of Masonic things. They have like 9 degrees or 10 degrees or something like that, and it's yeah, a little wacky.
You also have to be a Trinitarian Christian to be admitted to the order as well. It's not, they don't maintain the very, very simple religious tests that we do on this continent.
There's actually a guy in our lodge who he was Swedish when he joined. He was born in Sweden. He was working with Boeing in Everett, and he joined our lodge, and then he moved back to Sweden, where he continued on his Masonic journey in Sweden. So every once in a while I email back and forth with him, and yeah, it's just interesting, the stark difference between what we do and what they do. But I digress, unsurprisingly.
It's what we do best.
So what's that? I'm sorry.
As what we do best.
It's about all we do. That's why it's taken us so long to get through chapter 4. I did find that there's a paragraph right after, at least in my edition of the book, right after the talking about the protocols about brotherly love in lodges in Israel, and Arabs and Jews sitting side by side in lodges in Israel. And I would like to think that, given the current, I say the current strife, but let's face it, there's been strife there for a really long time, that there would be some path to something better that could be forged through Masonry. But I'm not confident that is the case. I wish it were the case.
No, and I don't know much about Freemasonry in Israel, but I know a lot of people going back a couple of centuries when Freemasonry was first starting to show up in India. There was commentary from observers outside the lodge that they marveled at the fact that people from so many different faiths and belief systems could get together in one place, and act cordially and fraternally with one another, because typically that wasn't the case outside of something like a lodge. It's not that you were always fighting, it's just that you never associated with people that were outside of a particular tribe or your particular religious group. So the fact that an organization came along where that was deemed to be, your background outside of the lodge was deemed to be less important than your internal character within the lodge. It was something that was quite novel at the time, and probably to a lot of people still is.
Yeah, it's my understanding that the spread of Masonry into India through the British occupation was obviously like you said, was how way of interfacing between the different groups, and that it was actually what gave rise to a lot of the masonry being, like you said, having a simple test of do you believe in a supreme being. Up until that point, it had basically been Christians and a few Jews who were Masons. And then as it spread into India, that I guess somebody wrote a nasty gram to the Grand Lodge of England and said, hey, what's up with these Hindu guys in my lodge? And essentially they said, you know what, if you believe in a supreme being, we're good with that. And that was sort of how that got rolling. Is my understanding, not a scholar, but yeah.
That was certainly because it was, the idea there that most polytheistic faiths have at least a a head of council, so to speak, which would serve as in place of a monotheistic being. But the idea is that you still believe something higher than yourself and a moral code and a revelation that went with it. So there was your your answer to your religious test.
Speaking of religious tests, so now there's the next section in my book is finding a conflict between Masonry and Islam where none exists. And I'm sure I read all those pages, but I don't really remember a whole lot about that section. Could you guys rescue me on that one? Was there something that you recall from that?
Don't really recall that. I don't know that in a lot of the Islamic countries that Freemasonry is particularly active. I read years ago in a book that there was some Masonic activity in Saudi Arabia, but it was very quiet, and most of it for a long time was supported by one of the constituent lodges of the Grand Lodges of Germany. I don't think that there had ever been a move to establish a quote unquote native Grand Lodge for Saudi Arabia, and I don't know that over the years much has really developed. In other places like, say, Qatar or Bahrain or Dubai, which is odd because a lot of those places are former British colonies, but they were, before the discovery of oil, they were kind of backwaters anyways. There wasn't a lot going on there. And with the transient populations being what they were, I don't think it really supported Freemasonry all that well. And I don't know, again, my understanding, years picking through what I've read over the years, a lot of Muslim countries didn't. It's not that they showed overt hostility to Freemasonry. It's just it was something that never ever really developed on its own.
Yeah, there was a Grand Lodge, or there is a Grand Lodge of Iran, I know, that was active up until the revolution, and now it's the Grand Lodge of Iran in exile, and it's in California. So it's there have been some interactions, obviously, between Islam and Freemasonry, but my perception is that fundamentalist religions in general, be they Christian or is Muslim or other religions, the more fundamentalism you get about your religion, the less you appreciate Masonry, is my general take on that. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's my perception.
I know we've all had those conversations where somebody asks you about it and they realize you're a Mason, and then all of a sudden it takes an interesting turn where they, I had somebody in a bookstore say one time that Freemasonry was Luciferian, globalistic, and the light that Freemasons sought was satanic in nature. So just unpack that one.
Yep.
And all it was because I'd gone into a bookstore and asked the clerk at the desk for if they had anything on Freemasonry in stock at the moment. And I was approached and someone said, well, I hear you're asking about Freemasonry, and that's where the conversation went. And I just sort of politely excused myself at the end of it. And because I'm there's nothing I'm going to say in a moment like that that's going to change somebody's mind or attitude. So I'm not going to bother. And there's always the risk of those conversations becoming overtly hostile without much effort on either side. So I'm just like, thank you for your opinion and have a nice day.
It wasn't McLeod's Books in Vancouver by any chance, was it?
No, it was a bookstore that's closed now, but it was all new books. But yeah, no, the that bookstore is gone. But just one of those. Yeah, I for some reason, yeah, it always sticks in my mind how that happened.
Oh, yeah, not a sponsor, but if anybody out there listening to the show is ever in Vancouver, British Columbia, not Washington, and is looking for a cool bookstore, there's this place called McLeod's Books in downtown Vancouver. And several of my Masonic volumes back there are from there, and they have all sorts of. It's a wild place. They have all sorts of great stuff. I really love it there.
It's almost a smaller version of Powell's books in Portland. I don't know if you've ever been there.
It is. Yes, we go there on a regular basis. Every time my children are back in town from college, we have to go to Powell's because it's. They
And
love
I
it there.
once I forgot I can't even remember the name of the bookstore if it's still there, but once upon a time I heard from somebody that there was a treasure trove of Masonic books in um, Bellingham. And one weekend I drove down there with my parents and I cleaned them out.
Nice.
And I've still got, yeah, there was quite a few of them. I think I've got the Mackey's entire 7 volume history of Freemasonry, all leather bound. Um,
Nice.
what it was an estate sale that had come up.
Ah,
And I think somebody, it's one of those tragic things. It's something I'm going to think about when I get older about what to do with my books, because I don't want them just sort of dumped at a used bookstore like happened here. I'd like to think I can find a home for them or a better use for them.
does the Grand Lodge of BC have a library or?
They did at one point, and I think they still maintain one after moving into their new premises. It's been years since I've been in that building, and it was a small library, but well kept and well sorted, and I wish I'd spent more time there. But I know there's a couple of jurisdictions in the States that apparently are renowned for their libraries. I think the Grand Lodge of Iowa is one.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, that's something like I said, the books are something I'm going to consider when I
Yeah,
can, get
kind of
older.
are off topic, but here we go. My wife and I, since our youngest child is now over 18, we're going to rewrite our wills, and we were talking about what we're going to basically we split everything between the kids, right? But they're not going to want this. So
No,
I was thinking about exactly that, just saying to give it to the Grand Lodge of Washington Library and let them figure out what's worth keeping and what's not and what they can pass on. But yeah, we've really digressed now from masonry and Islam to my book collection when I die. But I guess it's a religious thing. I don't
well, I
know.
remember something about a herding cats comment that was made in one of our earlier conversations. So yeah, that comes up. Um, yeah, I know. Like I said, I don't know that Freemasonry ever made much of a toehold in the Islamic world. I know, but I know that there have been well-known and well-regarded Freemasons of the Islamic faith. I just can't think of any at the moment. Um, so I don't know that Freemasonry per se ever went through any sort of a very serious prohibition in any of the Masonic countries. I don't know in Iran after the revolution of 1979. Like I said, the entire Grand Lodge went into exile. Freemasons that stayed behind in Iran, I don't know what their situation was, if they were rounded up or left alone, or what happened. I would imagine the buildings were all turned into other purposes, but and it most likely will be a long time before Freemasonry is active in that country again. The communist regimes were another one that prohibited and banned Freemasonry outright. And I think in all of these cases, the biggest problem with it is the perception around the concept of Masonic secrecy. You know, what are you guys hiding in there?
Yep.
You know,
Yeah,
what are
that
you
seems to be
what are
everybody.
you doing, and how are you communicating with one another behind those closed doors? And where nature abhors a vacuum, any sort of a totalitarian regime will abhor secrecy, even though it practices itself, secrecy itself quite as a matter of course, actually.
So speaking of totalitarian regimes, how about those French? So there's, I don't know much about it, but I know that I've heard stories that some people believe that large swaths of the revolutionaries in the French Revolution were Masons and that they were very politically active and that sort of thing. Do you guys remember anything about that, or is that?
Well, he starts off that section by just saying, blame it on the French and maybe one German. Yeah, so it's definitely some issues with. But the other thing is, yeah, there was a lot of people leaving other areas and going to France, right, to get out of their problems they're having in their country or whatever, or dictators or whatever, anarchy and stuff. And so there was France was basically the first melting pot, if you want to call it that, to coin a term, but maybe not
All
so
right.
much, maybe not so much melting.
Do
Melting
either of
down.
you guys have any familiarity with Jefferson? Have either of you guys studied his history at all? Because I
A
know
little bit.
he spent years in France. And I wonder if he made a Mason in France, or did he do that in the United States? Or because I mean,
My understanding is that Jefferson was not actually a Mason, but
was he not?
that's
Or is that
let's let Google decide. But that is my understanding, was that he's one of those people that everybody thinks was a Mason, but was not actually a Mason. But
okay?
I could be wrong.
I think that's correct. Yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah.
I think
So there's, and I know the Grand Orient of France, the current largest Masonic body in France is not not politically active. Like they regularly have opinions on candidates or on political topics and that sort of stuff. So, but although the Grand Orient of France is also not recognized by many places, many other Masonic bodies outside of France, but it's definitely part of their MO.
Mhm.
like you were talking about earlier, Matt, too, that there's a lot of ebb and tide with Freemasonry and control and monarchies and everything, and that's really what was happening in France too. Because as power would change, then the next guy would like it, the next guy wouldn't like it, and then sometimes they would like it, but then later on, it's like, wait a minute, it looks like I may be losing control here. Why are as he talks about, why are the noblemen and the regular guys sitting next to each other and shoulder to shoulder? We got to stop this. So control plays a big part of that whole chaos, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. And that was along with my earlier fundamentalist religion comment. The two things that I seem to hear regularly that are against Masonry are the God of my church is the God, and the rest of y'all are going to hell, and so ergo Masonry, by accepting people of different faiths, is bad. And the other one is, like someone said earlier, the privacy of what we do in lodge, and like Craig was saying, that it can't be good that these people are talking and I don't know what they're saying.
Well, I go back to that conversation I had in the bookstore there. The man had said to me, "Well, if it's so good, what happens in lodge? Why is it kept a secret?" And I wasn't savvy enough to really have a response to that. But I mean, now I would say, well, it's not the point, because Freemasonry represents something that we largely lack in this Western society, which is a proper system of initiation, which exists in many other parts of the world, where people are again, going back to earlier discussions about the Jewish faith, I believe it's at the age of 13 that boys are given a bar mitzvah, and that's a ceremony indicating that they are now men in the religion. And later there was another ceremony called a bat mitzvah that was kind of adopted for girls, to give them the same sort of thing, but it was that kind of thing exists in a lot of cultures, and it's largely been forgotten or replaced by other things in Western culture. And we don't really have an initiatory system where somebody can say that they have moved from one phase of their life to another by sort of trial and ceremony.
And I'm sure I've told this story before on the pod, but I knew a guy who I thought would make a good Mason, and he and I were talking about it, and he said, well, if something happened in lodge or people talked about stuff in lodge or whatever, would I go home and be able to tell my wife about it? And I said, well, I'm sure I've told my wife about things that went on in lodge, but really it's a space where we're supposed to, be able to speak freely and not have it be repeated outside of lodge to non-Masons and that sort of thing. And he said, well, he and his wife had both made a promise to each other that there would be no secrets between them whatsoever. And he was a financial advisor. And I said, well, it's private. It's not secret. Like, you keep your clients' social security numbers. You probably don't talk about those with your wife, but that's something you're holding to yourself that you're not sharing with. But anyway, yeah. So secrecy, sometimes a thing.
And I think we've talked about this before too. That's the secrets of Masonry isn't necessarily that it's the secret that you're keeping, it's that you can keep a secret. And it's the trust factor. It's the development of trust and understanding and connection. Yeah. Yeah. Not as, what do they say? Not a society of secrets, but a society with secrets or
not a secret society, but a society with secrets.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting that he was talking about they also didn't like the idea in France that the lodges were elected. They wanted, because it's a monarchy, right? So they wanted to maintain that idea. And so the idea of the lodges and the officers being elected by a vote of a democratic ballot, they didn't like that at all.
I think at that time before the revolution, French society was very heavily stratified. So you didn't really stray outside your particular social class. And there wasn't really a lot of opportunity in French society, I think there was lots of opportunity. There's always plenty of opportunity in societies like that for downward mobility, but not a lot of opportunity for upward mobility. So, if you were a member of the merchant or the small business class, there's no way you were getting to be a royal. But if you're a royal and you developed some vice-like habits, there was still plenty of ditches you could end up in.
Yep. The slide is a lot easier to go down than the ladder is to go up.
Yeah. We all learned that lesson in first grade.
It's interesting. I didn't know the last part about that Ramsey, when he talks, they had created 1,000 different degrees and conferred 100 different groups, and they were creating just massive chaos, if you will. And by the not even 1800, the whole idea of Masonry in France was under chaos. I guess I didn't really know about that, but I'd never heard of 1,000 or 1,100 different degrees. What degrees could you get out of? I mean, I guess, I suppose you could create the degree of the stone or something. I don't know.
It's hard to say, pick any of the cardinal elements, fire, earth, air, water. You can start working on that. Before we started recording tonight, Matt and I were discussing earlier about our, both of us are members of the Scottish Rite as well. And, we've thought about the York Rite at various times, but I said, there's a lot out there, probably more than needs to be. And it's certainly something that it doesn't help going down, going through your path in this fraternity to sign up for so many things, because you say yes to a lot of things and you never learn about the value of the important ones. I'm kind of butchering or vastly compressing our conversation, but I'd have to think that with a guy like Ramsey developing so many degrees, how many of them were serious? How many of them were, or how many of them were the results of one too many bottles of wine? And if you take an eagle and a crown and a scepter and combine them this way, and we'll call it this and say it means that, there's no meaning, no purpose to it. But some of these things have hung around over the years. Some of the more resilient ones, anyways.
Yeah, it always does.
The ones that added value would last. Yeah. Sorry, David.
No, that's right. It is frustrating to think that, and I constantly will say this: why as a third degree Mason, as a Blue Lodge Mason, why am I not entitled to know anything and everything about Freemasonry?
And it's I don't know if I'm sure both of you have noticed this before, but people will ask, who are not Masons, who don't have a lot of understanding of the the fraternity, the subject of the 33rd degree Mason will come
Right.
up.
Right.
And I've tried to explain to people, it's like, well, that's a high Mason, that's a high ranking person in a particular branch of Freemasonry. And then, you start trying to explain it and the eyes glaze over and it's like, okay, you know what, just go with what you were thinking before. There's a couple of, I seem to remember a movie that was kind of a take on Sherlock Holmes that had a Masonic angle to it, and it was about the whoever was playing Sherlock Holmes was talking about well, the order is preserved amongst the 33rd degree Freemasons, and I'm like, yeah, okay, all right, well, sometime we should do an episode about film and Freemasonry, because I can think of one quite recently that kind of got my skin crawling, that where it was like, okay, obviously whoever put this scene in this particular film had no clue what was going up.
We've talked about that before. I think we should do a masonry in the media, or masonry in film.
Well, I mean, I've always said to people that you don't truly understand how badly Hollywood can screw something up until you go out, you realize what you know best in life, what subject you are really, really almost an expert at in life and your own experiences, and go find the movie that's made on that subject. And then you'll realize why people just get angry with certain things they see in film. I doing what I do for a living, working on the railway and driving freight trains, I can name off any number of movies where it's like, no, they just didn't get that right.
Because those things can totally stop on a dime.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, well, before we get to the Illuminati, which is, I'm sure, everyone's favorite Masonic topic, I think we've about hit our time limit here. Does anybody have anything else they want to wrap up about religion and or France and Masonry?
No.
Hearing none. And if anybody out there knows more about these topics, we'd be happy to learn more. Frankly, as I've expressed my ignorance several times and yet continued talking in this episode, I'd love to learn more about some of these topics. So if folks out there know something, please let us know. But until then, and I didn't say at the top of the show, which I meant to, that Steve couldn't be here tonight. He's off planning for the Grand Lodge of British Columbia and Yukon annual communication next year. So we wish him all the luck in that endeavor, because I'm sure there are a lot of moving parts to getting something like that put together. So with that, on behalf of Steve and David and Greg, I keep wanting to call you Greg tonight for some reason, Craig and myself, I want to thank you all for listening to the Working Tools podcast, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. Goodbye.